State Capture Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, has recommended that ministers should not be solely responsible for the appointment of boards of state-owned enterprises. He expressed this view in the first part of his report on state capture into allegations of corruption and fraud in the public sector. For reaction now on this report, I am joined by Dr Sam Koma, political analyst. Dr. Koma, thank you so much for your time. Do you think that this is practical, the recommendation that has been made that ministers should not be, wholeheartedly be the ones appointing board members? Good afternoon to you.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Tsaro. Yes, I'm glad that this recommendation or a finding also was flagged by the Judicial Commission, which looked into allegations of state capture regarding the functionality of the boards that are, in terms of legislation, appointed by the ministers. For example, the board of the South African Airways, that is the responsibility of the Minister of Public Enterprises, and there is evidence that is being presented before the Commission, and the finding is quite clear-cut that there has been malice, there has been malfeasance, there has been poor oversight. Also, there has been a culture of impunity and lack of consequences on the part of the South African Airways. This has to do with the role of the board in failing to execute its fiduciary duties and also obligations. The same obtains with Eskom. You can see that the evidence and the findings of the report does point to this reality, that there were certain board members who were colluding with external role players, in this case, role players who happen to be service providers or who happen to be directors of companies who have an interest on the procurement spend of these state-owned enterprises. Bearing in mind that these state-owned companies, Transnet, Eskom, SAA, and others, are the engine of our economy. And if you look at the procurement spend per year, it totals around 1 trillion rands. And the bulk of this is being allocated to the state-owned companies. So it appears there is evidence that points to the fact that some of these board members were improperly appointed by the respective ministers who were appointed by the former president to head those ministerial portfolios. So this is a lesson coming out of this commission, but this is not the only evidence that we have. You realize that we also had the PIC commission report that revealed the same deficiencies, the same governance lapses in the PIC. You also had the Nugent Commission report also revealing the same findings regarding how the South African Revenue Service was weakened to further the narrow and selfish interest of specific individuals during the tenure of Mr. Tom Moyane. The Bain Company is implicated. Former President Zuma is also implicated in that respect in terms of the role that he played in facilitating that particular aspect.
Now, Dr. Koma, do you think that this recommendation will be taken seriously? You've just mentioned the other commissions that were set up or inquiries that were set up which had the same kind of recommendation. So do you think this one from the state capture will be taken seriously?
Yes, so, I mean, 1 billion rand has been channeled into the operations of this commission. This is taxpayers' money. Obviously, as taxpayers, we really demand, to see consequences. We also have to obviously see value for money deriving from the work of this commission. So the ball is now in the court of the president, law enforcement agencies, and parliament. And in fact, if you read the report, there are certain recommendations that by now, law enforcement agencies should start actioning immediately. They don't have to wait for the final report to be presented to the president or wait for the president to go to parliament by the 30th of June of this year to present this implementation plan. For example, there was a criminal complaint lodged against Ms. Dudu Mieni by the Secretary of the Commission, Professor Musala. That is a matter that has to be finalized by law enforcement agencies. The sooner the better. You also have, for example, a recommendation that has to do with perjury charges that have to be laid against Mr. Tom Moyane for the evidence that he gave before the parliamentary inquiry. It's in the report. That is one aspect that law enforcement agencies should start actioning. So we expect SAPS, the Directorate of Priority of Crimes, that is the Hawks, the Asset Forfeiture Unit of the NPA, including the NPA, to start initiating steps. One, to recover some of the amounts that are now classified or declared as unlawful proceeds of crime, and also to take certain steps in actioning the recommendations of the report. So we cannot afford to have these recommendations made in the report very damning in nature, and law enforcement is not actioning some of these recommendations, including the role of Parliament, which is expected to play an oversight role over the executive that is headed by the President, including the President being held accountable.
Now, Dr. Koma, of course, if we do not have ministers then solely responsible for appointing board members of SOEs, this will then lead to some form of transparency, wouldn't it, if other entities or other civil organizations are brought in to work with the minister to appoint these board members?
Yes, in fact, this is a transparent process that we have already seen sometime in 2018 regarding how Ms. Batohi, the head of the NPA, was appointed. Remember, it was a public interactive process, very transparent. The same with how the Commissioner of South African Revenue Service, Mr. Kisweta, was appointed, very transparent, a public-driven process. So this is also in the report to say it's high time that the manner in which directors of these boards are appointed cannot be the sole preserve of the minister of a specific ministerial portfolio. Open up the process, let be nominations, but very important, the criteria should be very explicit, that you are looking for candidates or individuals who possess the necessary skills, expertise, experience, and knowledge in that specific sector. So if it's telecommunication, the same will apply. If it's energy like Eskom, the same will apply, including South African Airways, PRASA, and other state-owned companies.
That is Dr. Sam Koma, political analyst, of course, just reacting to the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. That report has been handed over, the first part, to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Koma, this afternoon.